So once you've figured out your revenues, you've got to actually figure out your costs. Typically where we start is understanding something called the cost of goods sold, or COGS.
Notice how in revenue we split everything up into units. 1 unit times another unit equals total units sold. We want to do the same thing with costs. For each item we sell, what are the bits that make that item exist in total? So it might be 1 frame, 1 bit of canvas, and 1 litre of paint for a painting, or 60 cents of coffee beans and 10 cents of milk to make a single cup of coffee. We're not going to worry about things like wages and rent and electricity. We're just going to do the cost of goods sold, the stuff that's used up when we make the thing we're selling. Just like before, we're going to lay out our assumptions and then do a bunch of maths in the other tab.
What will cost you more for each incremental unit that I make? That's a good rule of thumb to understanding cost of goods sold. So thinking about your cost of goods sold, you need to think about how much goes into a unit that you sell. So for example, if you are making muffins, you might know that it's going to cost you $20 in raw ingredients to make 20 muffins. So you can figure out broadly that your cost of goods sold is $1 per muffin. I can either make that muffin myself or I can buy it from a wholesale supplier. You want to figure out how much it's cost you to get the product that you're selling. And then as your business grows, you'll find that your cost of goods per unit will also change. So if I'm baking 20 muffins a day, I'm probably going to go to Coles or Woolies or my local independent grocer, hopefully, to buy the products I need. If I'm making 200 muffins a day, I might be better off going to Costco and buying things in bulk. And my cost of goods sold might come down from $1 a muffin to 75 cents a muffin. So your cost of goods sold, hopefully, should scale per unit over time and should become more profitable. And let's think about all the cost of goods sold that we need. We've got a line item in the model for inflation because it's important to think about how inflation impacts the cost. If we're buying flour and milk and coffee, we should assume that the price of those things is going to go up each year. So 3% is a good assumption for inflation. So first let's think about our muffin ingredients. So we've done our calculations and we figured out that it costs us about $1.50 per muffin to actually produce that muffin. So we'll input that cost of goods sold assumption across the board. And then next we also have to think about how we sell those muffins. So let's just assume that the disposable muffin wrappers costs you 5 cents. You can copy that assumption over. But now what I realized I've done is that these costs are flat over the 3 years. Costs can go up by inflation, as we've discussed. So we need to incorporate that inflation assumption in these formulas and in the other formulas as well. So how do we do that? How does inflation work? So inflation of 3% means our costs are going to go up by 3% in year 2. So the formula for that would be taking the initial assumption of $1.50 per muffin, multiplying it by 1 plus the inflation factor. So we're saying we want to take that $1.50 and we're going to replace that $1.50 1 times, but add the 3% growth. So instead of costing us $1.50 in year 1, it's going to cost us $1.55 in year 2, and that impact is going to compound in year 3 because we're going to have the first year's inflation as well as the second year's inflation. So if you copy that formula over, it will still work and it'll give us a price of $1.59 in year 3. Let's figure out if we've got all the cost of goods sold that we need to calculate our formulas. So we've got to figure out how much it costs us to produce all the muffins we're going to sell in year 1. So we need some of the assumptions from the revenue because it's also a function of how many cups of coffee we sell over the course of a year. So let's think about it. If we go back to assumptions, it costs us for each muffin that we sell $1.50 plus 5 cents for each wrapper, right? So it costs us $1.55 in total. So we add together those cost of goods sold inputs, the muffin ingredients and the disposable wrappers that would go around them, and we multiply that by how many muffins we're going to sell over the course of the year. So again, that's 15 muffins an hour, 5 hours a day, times 5 days a week, times 45 days a year. And so we get a cost of goods sold for muffins in year one of $26,000. Let's copy that formula over and see what happens. So we can see the cost of goods sold is going up. Now we need to think, does that make sense? The cost of goods sold is going up. Now, in this case it does, because if we go back to our revenue assumptions, we're selling more muffins each year. So we're selling only 15 an hour in year one, 25 an hour in year two, and 40 an hour in year three. So we're selling that many more muffins, so our cost of goods sold is going to go up with the additional volume. So are the numbers moving in the direction you expect them to move? So going back to our cash flow, we need to just do the same for our beverages. Great. So in year one, cost of goods sold is $18,500, and let's copy it over and see what happens. Your gross profit is the profit you've got left after you've paid for what it actually costs you to sell the product or service that you're selling. So it's how much I can charge for that product, less what it actually cost me to produce that product or service. That's my gross profit, your direct costs that go into selling your product. So the higher your gross profit, the more money you've got to pay for the other operating costs that go into running your business. So when we do the formula for our gross profit, we know gross profit is our total revenue minus our total cost of goods sold. Now let's copy the gross profit formula over and see what's happening. Directionally, it looks like it's making sense because everything is going up. Your actual gross profit will be a dollar figure, but we often talk about gross margins as a percentage. So your gross profit margin is really your gross profit divided by the revenue. What our gross margin tells us is, as a percent of revenue, are we becoming more or less profitable each year? So as we discussed before, our gross margin is really the gross profit divided by total revenue. So as a percentage of revenue, how much are we earning each year? So we know that after we've sold, after we've accounted for what it costs us to make the muffins and the drinks, we're earning a profit margin of 65%, or a gross margin of 65% in year one. In year two, if we copy that formula over, it's 64%, and in year three, it's 63%. Now, that's not moving in the direction we'd want it to move. In theory, we haven't taken into account any benefits from the increased volume of muffins that we're selling. So in theory, we might think that instead of costing, because we're buying goods in more bulk, we're buying the ingredients in more bulk, and we're selling more muffins, that instead of costing us $1.50 a muffin, and our reduced cost because of the greater volume, it'll cost us $1.40 in year two and $1.30 in year three. And we're not explicitly taking into account an inflation factor, because sometimes you can't be that precise, right? We don't know exactly what the costs will be. We're making an assumption. So it's kind of silly to gross up an assumption by 3%. So another thing to note, and this is not important in terms of the actual results, but in terms of formatting, what we typically do is we color code assumptions in blue, and we color code outputs in black. So just to make sure we're being consistent, let's make all these numbers blue. Now that we've taken into account reduced cost of goods sold for each muffin, because we're selling more muffins each year, when we go back and look at our profit margin, we'd expect our profit margin to hopefully go up, and that's what it's doing. So shows we're on the right track, and at the moment, it's not looking like there are any problems with our formulas. Well, hopefully you've got a relatively robust gross profit margin. If you've got a really low gross profit, it's going to be really challenging unless you've got virtually no operating expenses to make a healthy bottom line margin.
Investors and people that know more about money than us are going to look at that number, and they're going to have a really good gut feel for whether it's in the right ballpark for the kind of thing you're selling.
Understanding what's a healthy gross margin or not, it really depends on your industry, and it also depends on the volume that you're selling. So you might have really slim margins in groceries, for example. It's a very low margin business at the end of the day, but they make up for it ideally in selling large volumes. So it really depends on the nature of your business and how high that margin needs to be. Your cost of goods sold is very different depending on what the type of business is that you're doing.
Okay, here are some different examples of COGS. So in the coffee cart, our main cost of goods sold is the stuff that goes into the things we sell at the cart. Coffee, flour, cake, etc. For, say, a carpenter or a furniture maker, the cost of goods sold is going to be the wood that goes into the furniture. For a service business, like a lawyer or a graphic designer or an accountant, there's going to be basically no costs of goods sold, like the paper that you write your invoices on.
For software, it might just be, for example, the cost of hosting. That's why software businesses can be quite profitable, because you're not paying a lot more for each unit that you sell. Effectively, the costs are fixed across your hosting. But if you don't know what the cost of goods sold is for your business, the best way to understand that is to go and speak to other people in the same industry. So if you're not sure if you're going to make a product yourself or source a product from a supplier, the best thing to do is figure out what those costs are going to entail. So which one will give you a higher gross profit margin at the end of understanding what's going to give you the greatest gross profit is obviously how much revenue can I generate and what's going to cost me to sell it. I might be able to produce products really cheaply by baking them at home, but if I'm a horrible cook and I can't bake muffins for my life, maybe I'll sell more products if I buy them from a wholesale supplier who's got a great reputation and delivers high quality, tasty products.
If you've done COGS right, you'll know how much profit you make per unit. This is before you spend money on things like wages and rent and everything else. This is expressed in two numbers, a dollar figure and a percentage. This margin percentage is really exciting because you can just Google average gross margins for your kind of product, which means you'll be able to see if your cost of production is competitive with similar products in the market out there.
Your ethics and what's driving you as part of your business needs to be shown in your business model. So if you're about ethically sourcing the best cocoa for your muffins and your hot chocolate, you have to be consistent through that because that's what makes your business special. You might have to pay more for those ingredients. Your cost of goods sold might be more than the coffee shop down the corner, but your whole hypothesis is that I'm doing something that supports a robust value chain, and hopefully people will support that because people are starting to be more conscious about what they consume and how they consume it.